Speaker. Let's all ready ourselves for some shroud waving. I rise to speak, perhaps as one of the only people in this room, perhaps even in the Commons, who has actually run one of these precious services. And let me tell you, today it has been so frustrating, the lack of understanding of the practicalities and the realities of how it actually works. It's been mind-boggling, so I apologise if that has come out as aggression. There are many women who stick in my head who have lived in refuge, and even more children. None more so than Amira, the only woman who actually brought tears to my eyes, because you learn to live with it. Amira was found pregnant on the side of the road after she had drunk bleach to end her life. Whilst with her perpetrator, she'd been kept chained to a table and fed scraps like an abused animal. In refuge, we had to teach her to eat again, with small portions and slow progress. When her beautiful daughter was born, it was a refuge worker who held her hand in labour and a refuge manager who picked her up from the hospital and took her back home. And the women in refuge became her family. Refuges are amazing. I think back to the Conservative members I've walked around the women's refuges where I worked and Amira lived. I remember drinking tea with the Honourable Member for Halesowen and Rowley Regis and the then Minister Francis Maud in the playroom of one of our refuges. That playroom he so delighted in and gladly posed for his photo op will not be there if these changes pass. Likelihood is they wouldn't have a refuge to visit under those circumstances. But they were not our most eminent guests. It goes to the Home Secretary herself, who was a keen visitor of my domestic violence services. If the government plans to reduce housing benefit do not exempt this group, the ministers will be letting down the Home Secretary in a big way. For every net she tries to put in place, these proposals without exemptions will snip a hole for women and children to fall through. The minister in front of me should make no mistake, when people slip through these safety nets, no amount of hard work or personal responsibility will help them. They will face danger, abuse and in too many cases, death. The coalition government and this government have in some departments shown their commitment to these families. The Home Office, while by no means perfect, have tried to invest pots of money and create schemes for improved access to service and have taken a good hard look at laws which will help these victims. There is a lot more to do, and I don't think that they're not trying, and I do think that they care. I'm afraid to say that they are woefully let down by other government departments who fail to recognise their role in the fight to end domestic abuse. There is no greater offender than the Department for Communities and Local Government, with their brutal cuts to local authorities, which have already closed 34 specialist women's refuges since 2010. Last year, just before the election, facing shroud waving from Women's Aid, they suddenly had an epiphany and released a fund to stimulate increased refuge bed spaces. I will.
I appreciate my honourable friend giving way. Does she not agree with me that these constant references to shroud waving are in fact an insult to those refugees and the housing associations who are genuinely concerned that they're going to have to close accommodation for the most vulnerable people? For example, 13 who do great work in the Tees Valley with veterans, with ex-offenders, women fleeing domestic violence, those recovering from addictions, are going to have to close supportive accommodation. If the party opposite are so genuinely bothered about scaremongering and shroud waving, they could put an end to that by doing something about this policy today.
I couldn't agree more. The simple thing to do is exempt them. I think we all know that the government are probably going to do it. We've waved our shrouds in every single case, and you know what? They listened. So stop me having to talk about this. Stop making me a shroud waver. Just do it. Anyway, going back to the 10 million quid over the 12 months that they gave just before the election, which was intended to create new beds. I've heard ministers stand at that dispatch box and quote the number of extra bed spaces that they've created, and I know that every single bed that will have been put forward in that fund would have made the calculation based on the current and existing rates of housing benefit. I know that every bid would have had, as part of their sustainability plan, beyond the 12 months, calculations based on the current and existing housing benefit rates. Without the housing benefit plus settlement, the £10 million offered would have been completely meaningless. And I know this because I helped to write 3 of the successful bids. I have run refuges that survive solely on housing benefit contributions without any recall to the now non-existent Supporting People funds. At my charity, when times were tough and our refuge funding was cut in half, we sucked it up. We made tough decisions. We found new ways, new funds. We worked on different models to bring in support staff to our refuges. None of it would have been possible without the existing system for housing benefit. That's why we got all those Tories coming to see us. Hadn't we done such a good job of cutting our cloth? We could only do it because of housing benefit. Day one of this change would have closed at least 20 of our bed spaces, turning away every year over 100 women and as many, if not more, vulnerable children. This week I stood in the childcare debate and begged once again for the responsible minister to consider exempting victims of domestic violence from the rules around the 16-hour threshold for increased childcare. He stopped me in my tracks and made that commitment. I am begging those opposite to do what he did, what the Home Secretary is trying to do, to protect victims of domestic violence and their children. The Minister might think it is hyperbole, but I shall say it anyway. Without the exemption, what he is proposing for many will be a death penalty. Please don't do it.
Yeah.